In 1965, a fleet mechanic at a Pennsylvania trucking company named Carl Shaeffer changed the oil on a Chevy small block using a procedure he had learned from his father in 1948. He warmed the engine for exactly 4 minutes. He drained the pan for the full 8. He cleaned the drain plug with a rag and held the magnetic tip under a shop light, reading the metal shavings the way a doctor reads bloodwork. He primed the new filter before he threaded it on. He filled the crankcase, started the engine, and stood with his hand on the valve cover until the oil pressure gauge climbed and the lifters went quiet. The truck logged 612,000 miles on its original bottom end. When it was finally pulled apart in 1988, the rod bearings still had factory crosshatch on the journals. Carl Schaefer was not lucky. He was doing 7 specific things during every oil change that modern quick-lube shops have completely forgotten. 5 of those 7 are on this list. They understood oil the way they understood weather. Not because they had chemistry degrees, but because the oil was something a man could see, smell, and rub between his fingers. When the color changed, they knew what it meant. When the engine consumed a quart between changes, they did not panic. They diagnosed. We replaced that instinct with a sticker on the windshield and a 15-minute drive through that treats every engine the same. We did not improve the oil change. We stripped it of every step that made it matter. And the men whose hands and ears knew the difference between a healthy engine and a dying one are almost gone. Number 19 on this list uses nothing but a clean white rag and 30 seconds of patience. And it diagnoses bearing wear a dealership would charge $480 to scan for. Number 8 was performed by every competent fleet mechanic in America before 1975 and was quietly removed from quick-lube training manuals because the step it eliminates is the most common cause of repeat visits. Number 3. The procedure Carl Schaefer learned from his father and never once skipped kept that small block alive for 612,000 miles while identical engines in the same fleet failed at 190,000. These 25 secrets were not shortcuts. They were proof that the mechanics who came before us were not less sophisticated. They were more attuned. And the gap between what they could feel on a drain plug and what we cannot is the exact measure of what convenience has cost us. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten 1965 oil change secrets that made engines last 600,000 miles. Number 25, warming the engine before draining the oil. You started the engine and let it idle for exactly 4 minutes, long enough to thin the oil and suspend the contaminants that settled overnight. Short enough that the exhaust manifold did not burn your forearms under the car. Carl Schaefer timed it with a pocket watch his father had given him. A Pennzoil service guide from 1964 confirmed the 4-minute window as optimal drain preparation. Every modern quick lube drains cold or drains scalding. Neither gets the dirt out. Cold oil keeps its secrets. Warm oil tells you everything. Number 24. Draining for the full 8 minutes. You pulled the plug and you waited. Not until the stream stopped. Until the drip stopped. A 1965 Chevrolet service manual specified full gravity drain because a half pint of contaminated oil left in the pan mixed with every quart of fresh oil after it. A fleet supervisor in 1966 Newark timed his mechanics with a wall clock. Any man who reinstalled the plug before 8 minutes did the job again. That half pint was not residue, it was poison, and patience was the only antidote. Number 23. Inspecting the drain plug magnet. You wiped the magnet clean with a rag and held it under a shop light. Fine dust meant normal wear. Visible flakes meant a bearing surface was failing. Wire-thin strands meant something inside was about to let go. Carl Shaeffer read the magnet at every change for 22 years. He caught 3 failing engines before the damage reached the crank. A 1965 Chevrolet heavy-duty service supplement listed drain plug inspection as mandatory in fleet maintenance. The magnet did not predict the future. It recorded the past. Number 22. Cleaning the drain plug threads. You wiped the threads with a clean rag and ran your fingernail across them. Burrs meant cross-threading was coming. An apprentice mechanic in 1963 at an Esso station in Baltimore was not allowed to reinstall a drain plug until his hands could feel the threads were clean. A 1963 GM service bulletin attributed 11% of oil leak complaints to damaged plug threads. The plug was not a cap, it was a seal, and a seal only works when both surfaces are clean. Number 21. Hand tightening the oil filter. You threaded the filter on by hand until the gasket contacted the surface. 3/4 of a turn more. By hand. Never with a wrench. A country mechanic in Tulsa in 1965 kept a jar of wrench-tightened filters from other shops. He showed them to every new customer as proof that the last man's hands had been careless. A 1964 Fram installation guide specified hand tightening only in bold type. Careful hands left a gasket that came off clean. Careless hands left a fight. Number 20. Pre-filling the oil filter. You held the new filter upright and poured oil into it until the element was saturated. You waited 30 seconds for it to wick through the media, then topped it off. The engine started with oil already in the filter housing, no dry interval on first startup. For Carl Shaeffer, whose hands had felt the scoring on bearings that ran dry for 5 seconds, the 90 extra seconds were not optional. A 1963 Purolator technical note confirmed that dry start bypass was the leading cause of premature bearing wear after routine service. That was not a ritual. That was protection measured in seconds and paid back in years. Number 19. Reading the old oil on a white rag. You caught a sample of draining oil on a clean white rag and held it to the light. A gritty texture between your fingers meant the filter had been overwhelmed. A milky swirl meant a coolant breach. A metallic sheen meant bearing material circulating. A gas station owner in Scranton in 1965 read every drain on a white rag for 31 years. He said the rag was his stethoscope. A 1964 Pennzoil dealer manual listed oil on rag inspection as a standard diagnostic step. The rag was not a tool, it was a witness. Number 18. Checking the old filter gasket. You ran your fingertip across the mounting surface on the block before threading the new filter on. If the old gasket had stuck and you doubled it, the engine would blow every drop of oil onto the floor in under 90 seconds. A junior mechanic in Memphis in 1964 learned this lesson on a customer's Pontiac. His boss made him check the surface on every car for a year. A 1964 Fram service bulletin identified the double gasket as the leading cause of catastrophic oil loss after a filter change. One glance saved the engine. One shortcut killed it. Number 17. Matching oil viscosity to the season. You held the dipstick on a January morning and felt the oil cling thick as honey. In 1965, no mechanic ran the same weight year-round. Summer demanded 30 weight. Winter demanded 10W30. A fleet dispatcher in Allentown in 1965 lost 2 engines in one winter before his mechanic explained that heavy oil turned every cold start into a dry start. A Shell lubrication guide from 1965 documented measurable bearing wear from cold starts with incorrect viscosity. The engine did not care about brand loyalty. It cared about viscosity. And viscosity was a conversation with the weather. The youngest American mechanics who learned to read a drain plug magnet, who felt the difference between clean oil and contaminated oil between their thumb and forefinger, who put their ears to a valve cover and heard whether the lifters were getting oil, are now past 70. They learned the oil change not as a service interval, but as a diagnostic event. The color of the oil was a blood test. The magnet was an X-ray. They are the last generation who treated a drain pan as a window into the engine's insides. When they are gone, the procedure that remains will be a filter swap by a technician who has never once looked at what came out of the engine. The chain is breaking. We are calling it efficiency. Number 16. Torquing the drain plug to specification. You tightened the plug with a box-end wrench until it's seated, then a quarter turn more. Not a half. Over-torquing crushed the copper washer and stripped aluminum pan threads. Carl Shaeffer never owned a torque wrench for drain plugs. His hands knew 18 foot-pounds the way a carpenter's hands know plumb. A 1965 Ford service manual specified that exact figure. That memory lived in his forearm. No spec sheet replaced it. Number 15. Replacing the drain plug washer. You pulled the old copper crush washer off the plug and pressed a fresh one into place. 3 cents. The washer deformed on installation to fill the gap. Reused, it leaked. Carl Schaefer kept a coffee can of them on his bench. A parts counterman in Akron in 1965 said the mechanics who bought washers never came back with leaks. A Delco catalog from 1965 listed the washer as a mandatory replacement item at every drain. The 3-cent part that every quick lube now skips is the part that keeps 5 quarts inside the engine. The savings was imaginary. The leak was real. Number 14. The post-fill idle pressure watch. You started the engine after filling and watched the oil pressure gauge. You did not drive. You stood at the window, ears tuned to the valve train, and watched the needle climb. 15 seconds to pressure was normal. 30 seconds meant the filter had not primed. A mobile station owner in Cleveland in 1965 refused to release a car until the gauge read 40 pounds. A 1964 mobile dealer operations manual listed the post-fill pressure check as a required step. He lost 2 minutes per car. He never lost an engine. Number 13. Running the engine and rechecking the level. You filled to the mark. You started the engine for 60 seconds. You shut it off, waited 2 minutes, and checked again. The level had dropped. The filter and galleries had taken their share. A shop foreman in 1965 Detroit fired a lube technician for sending a car out a quart low. The man had not rechecked. A 1964 Quaker State recommendation identified underfilling after a filter change as the most common oil change error. The dipstick did not lie, but it only told the truth after the engine had taken its first drink. Number 12. Checking for coolant contamination. You pulled the dipstick and looked at the underside of the oil filler cap. A mayonnaise-colored residue meant coolant mixing with oil. Catching it at the oil change meant a $14 gasket job. Missing it meant a $400 rebuild. A truck mechanic in Pittsburgh in 1965 checked the filler cap before he ever pulled the drain plug. A 1965 General Motors truck maintenance guide listed filler cap inspection as the first step in any oil service. The cap was the first witness. He never ignored it. Number 11. The PCV valve shake test. You pulled the PCV valve from the valve cover grommet and shook it beside your ear. A clean rattle meant it was flowing. Silence meant it was clogged. A stuck valve pressurized the crankcase and contaminated fresh oil within 1,000 miles. Carl Shaeffer replaced it at every other oil change. A 1963 GM emissions bulletin identified PCV failure as a primary cause of accelerated oil degradation. 2 shakes told him everything. That was not a diagnostic. That was a handshake with the engine's breathing system. Number 10. Oil filler cap seal inspection. You turned the cap over and pressed the rubber gasket with your thumb. Pliable meant sealed. Brittle meant open. A Sunoco station attendant in 1965 in Trenton replaced filler cap gaskets on every car through his bay because the quarter it cost was cheaper than a contamination complaint. A 1965 AC Delco bulletin listed cap seal failure as a factor in premature oil contamination. The cap was the door to the crankcase. A broken seal left it open. Nobody checked because nobody thought a $quarter part mattered. It mattered every mile. In 2023, the average oil change at a national quick-lube franchise cost $78 and took 12 minutes. In 1965, the same procedure cost $3.50 and took 25 minutes. The difference is not inflation. Every step that made the old oil change a diagnostic event has been removed because diagnostics slow throughput. A bay that processes 14 cars per hour generates more revenue than one that processes 6. The dealership and quick lube service network in the United States generates over $116 billion annually. That number depends on the driver not understanding what his engine needs. The steps on this list were not dropped because they were unnecessary. They were dropped because they were unprofitable. The industry replaced attention with volume. The engines paid the price. Number 9, inspecting the valve cover gaskets. You wiped the valve cover rails with a rag and looked while the oil drained. Seepage along the cork meant the gasket was hardening. A shade tree mechanic in 1965, rural Virginia, caught every valve cover leak at the oil change because the car was already in the air and his eyes were already under the hood. A 1965 Fel Pro gasket catalog recommended visual inspection of all cork gaskets at every oil service. The gasket was confessing. Nobody stopped to listen. Number 8. Verifying the old filter application. You compared the old filter to the new one before installing. Same height, same gasket diameter, same thread pitch. Carl Shaeffer once pulled a filter off a 283 Chevy that belonged on a Ford 6-cylinder. The engine had run unfiltered for 3,000 miles. A 1965 Purolator cross-reference guide ran to 42 pages for this reason alone. The wrong filter did not fail. It never worked. Checking was not paranoia. It was the step between trust and verification. Number 7. Wiping the filter mounting surface. You took a clean rag and wiped the machined surface where the gasket seated against the block. A dealership lube technician in Kansas City in 1965 wiped every mounting surface with the same rag he kept folded in his back pocket for 30 years. His hands knew the feel of a clean surface the way a carpenter knows sanded wood. A 1964 AC Delco filter installation sheet listed surface cleaning as step 1 before mounting. The surface was either clean or it was not. The seal that followed was either true or it was not. Number 6. Applying clean oil to the new filter gasket. You dipped your finger in fresh oil and ran it around the rubber gasket before threading the filter on. A dry gasket grabbed the surface and rolled on itself, creating a pinched seal that leaked from the first start. A parts counterman in Dayton in 1965 said he could tell which mechanics oiled the gasket by who came back with leaks. A 1964 Wix Filter Technical Bulletin confirmed that dry-mounted gaskets failed at 3 times the rate of lubricated ones. The finger of oil was not a shortcut. It was the difference between a gasket that sealed and one that pretended to. Number 5. Recording the oil change. You wrote it down. Date, mileage, oil brand and weight, filter number. Carl Shaeffer kept a logbook in the glove box of every truck. He noted the feel of the drain plug, the color on the rag, the sound of the lifters at startup. When something failed at 400,000 miles, the log told him what had been done and when. A 1966 AAA study showed vehicles with documented histories lasted 40% longer. The notebook cost 15 cents. No computer has replaced what those 15 cents did. Number 4. Inspecting the underside while the car was up. You swept a shop light across the underside while the oil drained. You looked for wetness on the rear main seal, the transmission pan, the fuel pump weep hole. A gas station mechanic in 1965, Wheeling checked every underside because the car was only in the air twice a year, and his ears could not hear a rear main seal weeping. His eyes did the work his ears could not. A 1965 Texaco station training manual called "The Oil Change the Most Valuable Diagnostic Opportunity in Routine Maintenance." Not because of the oil, because of the access. Number 3. Priming the oil system before first start. You pulled the coil wire so the engine would not fire. You cranked the starter for 10 seconds, stopped, then cranked again for 10 seconds. The oil pump filled every gallery and every bearing surface before combustion loaded them. Carl Schaeffer primed every engine after every filter change. A 1965 Chevrolet Fleet Maintenance Directive listed pre-start priming as a recommended procedure for all heavy-duty applications. Every modern quick lube starts the engine dry and lets the oil catch up. For the first 3 seconds, the bearings run on nothing but hope. Carl Schaefer ran on procedure. The bearings lasted 612,000 miles because of those 20 seconds. Number 2. The oil change interval by condition. You checked the dipstick every 3rd day. You rubbed the oil between your thumb and forefinger. When the viscosity had broken down and the grit was present, you changed it. Carl Schaefer never followed a schedule printed by the company that sold the oil. Sometimes 2,000 miles, sometimes 4,000 miles. A 1965 Shell technical memo acknowledged that optimal intervals varied by 60% depending on conditions. The schedule was not maintenance. The instinct was, and his hands knew the difference before any chart was printed. Number 1. Watching the oil pressure gauge after every change. That is all. After the fill, after the start, Carl Schaefer stood at the driver's window and watched the oil pressure gauge climb. He listened to the lifters quiet. He waited for the needle to settle at 40 pounds, steady and unmoving. Only then did the truck leave the bay. If the pressure climbed slow, something was wrong. If the lifters stayed noisy, something was starved. If the needle wavered, something was failing. He caught it at the oil change, not on the highway. Number 1 is not a technique. It is the habit underneath every other habit on this list. The gauge was always speaking. Carl Schaefer never once walked away before it finished. An oil change in 1965 was not a transaction. It was a small ritual that protected an investment a family had spent years earning. The mechanic warmed the engine before he drained the pan. He let the oil drain until the last drop fell. He cleaned the plug, read the magnet, and inspected the threads before anything went back together. He pre-filled the filter, checked the old gasket, and wiped the mounting surface clean. He primed the system before the engine fired. He watched the oil pressure gauge climb and listened for the lifters to go quiet. He wrote it all down in a 15-cent notebook. Every step was a small act of respect for a machine that, in return, ran for 612,000 miles on its original bearings. We replaced that ritual with a 12-minute drive-through and an engine that quietly fails at 150,000. The procedure was not slower because mechanics were less efficient. It was slower because they understood what they were protecting. That understanding is what we paid for, and it is what we stopped paying for the moment we decided convenience mattered more than craft. The oil is still in the pan. The filter is still on the block. The gauge still climbs when you start it. Someone just needs to stand there long enough to watch.